Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is AI Meets the Mid-Market, how PE-backed companies are leapfrogging with AI. I'm joined by Andrew Brooks, founder and CEO of Contextualize. Andrew, welcome.
Great to be here. I love the intro to the podcast. So excited for the conversation.
At least it's lively. I like that part. So.
There you go.
Obviously we had a nice chat to set this up, and in that you shared some of your background, and it's pretty amazing entrepreneurial track record. I mean, found in SmartThings, which became this widely adopted smart home platform that Samsung acquired, bought, build and sold SMB Live to ReachLocal. Now, Contextual.io. I mean, what took you from that smart home IoT space to AI solutions for the mid-market?
Yeah, I mean, there's a common thread that is not always obvious in my entrepreneurial background. I graduated in the late 90s. Everybody was starting companies then. So that's actually kind of what kicked off my passion around being a creator. But the thread that kind of ties all of the entrepreneurial activities I've done together is one of, there's a new technology, a new disruptive technology, an underserved market who has not adopted those technologies historically. And how do you create a platform and a capability that actually opens up that opportunity? So with SMB Live, it was very much around small businesses, hyper small businesses not yet being online, and how they should adopt that. With smart home, of course, it was smartphones came out in 2007, right? The iPhone 2007. So people had this new interface in their hand. All of these sensors were emerging, and we said there needs to be this consolidating platform that would bring these capabilities together for the mass market consumer. And I think the common thread with Contextual is very much as we saw AI become API addressable and therefore able to be integrated into business systems, we said there's an entire group, and for us, it's this mid-market, B2B services organizations largely, who historically has been a laggard in technology adoption. And we felt like there was going to be a leapfrog moment for them to say, hey, we can do new and different things with this technology that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to. So we wanted to build a platform that made that possible.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have seen this with some of the companies that I've worked with over the last couple of years, that for a mid-market company especially, there's some real opportunity to use this technology and apply it to their business and really leapfrog, as you've said. And, I'm curious from that perspective, can you paint a picture of, what does that opportunity look like to you, and why is this moment different than some of the other technological advances and waves that we've seen in the past?
Yeah. I mean, we see AI as in two flavors, right? You have AI as a new form of electricity. It can do things that historically you wouldn't have been able to do regardless of how much software you wrote. And then, of course, AI as a tool for accelerating the creation of software. And the combination of those creates an opportunity, we think, where especially mid-market companies, they would have never had the appetite, the economics, the operational capabilities to invest in purpose-built solutions historically. They generally are going to have an ERP system. Maybe they have a CRM system. They've got their Microsoft suite. And all of a sudden, because AI is this new form of electricity, and AI can accelerate development, they have the right to have a solution that is uniquely designed for their people, their data, their process, their way of work, potentially new human AI interfaces that historically, they wouldn't have created. And then that's the magical moment here is their right to own their AI, is what we would call it. Own how these systems don't rent a feature, but actually own a solution that is really specific to that business. And when we look at these mid-market companies, they have 25 years of institutional knowledge and it's locked in various people's brains, and you would
Right.
never again have been able to write the software that got to that intelligence. But AI gives you the ability to extract and leverage that intelligence. And so we certainly encourage our customers not to think of AI as just another technology. It's not people process technology where AI
Right.
is part of that. It's people process technology and now AI.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. I think one of the things I've talked to a lot of companies about is the mistake, I think, of trying to focus on the technology and not focus on the workflow or the people, right? Because that's actually the what's really involved in this is a lot bigger than, oh, I'm just going to implement another cloud solution, right? I mean, it's much more fundamental in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think too, you guys are focused on private equity portfolio companies, and I know when you spoke at South by Southwest, you talked about how private equity drives AI adoption, and you made the point that you're not disrupting a private equity portfolio company from the outside; it comes from the inside out, and which ties to my comments, I guess, too about human focus and workflow focus. But what do you think from an inside out disruption standpoint? What's that look like in practice? And when you're working with a company that's been operating the same way for years or decades, how does that transformation, really take effect?
Yeah, when you see all the hype coming out of Silicon Valley, and hey, we're going to completely disrupt the legal profession. We're going to completely disrupt the accounting profession. Those we would consider
Mm,
those kind of outside in disruption, right? It's a
right.
new entity coming into existence that's going to disrupt a bunch of businesses who happen to do that. When we look at our the portfolio companies that we work with, you're working from the inside out, meaning you're starting at how do they do business today. Why does something take 3 days that could potentially take 3 hours? Because there's nuance to it. There's maybe not mature data structures. There's manual processes. One of the examples I would give is, um, uh, so one of our clients is a fleet management company, and and by that I mean they manage like forklifts and pallet jacks and pallet movers
Mm,
in warehouses. They do that through a vendor managed network. Those vendors are ranging from large scale fleet management companies like Caterpillar down to
mm,
Joe the mechanic who knows how to water the batteries on an electric forklift. And so across 3,000 vendors who might be interacting with them, they're getting 14,000 plus emails a month with work orders and invoices of different forms and different formats. And you have to go into that organization and accept that that's the way business is done and has been done for a tremendous amount of time. And you
mm,
couldn't just say, hey, we're going to stand up an API and all 3,000 of your vendors are going to adhere to the API. That's not a realistic way to transform that business. But that example, 14,000 emails coming in with invoices and work orders being handled by 13 humans, is
mm,
a great example where AI can come in. And I think that the message to the team members there is we're trying to take the most tedious part of this job, the extraction and coding stuff into a
mm,
system, out of your work path so that you can focus on the next layer of value, looking for cost savings, looking for opportunities for efficiency. It changes how they work. And so I think disruption internally is understanding the people, understanding why they do something this way,
mm,
and then looking for kind of evolution, not necessarily complete revolution of that experience.
mm. I mean that hits on one of the things that I'd say we've been coming back to both from the show's perspective and then just in general from our research, is that it's easy for people to get focused on the idea that AI is going to be a replacement for people. But the truth is, from all I've seen, at least for now, it's not that. It's about building this hybrid collaborative workforce that combines digital with human in some unique ways. And I know you talked about before that like 90% of the solutions you build include some new human AI interface. I mean,
Yeah.
could you talk us through what that looks like and a real engagement? And then how do you make sure that humans both trust that new workflow, but also adopt the system and incorporate that into their workflow.
Yeah, change management is absolutely critical.
Mhm.
And I'll hit on some examples that I think drive that home. So, and everybody talks about human in the loop. The problem with human in the loop is it carries a little bit of I'm just checking the AI's job, and people
Mhm.
don't love that.
Yeah.
So, you hear kind of human in the lead or expert in the lead, as I think more accurate phrases around the types of systems that we would build. I'll give you a good example, and the evolution of change management that a client goes through. So one of our customers manages about 3,000 vacation rental properties down on the Gulf
Mm.
Coast of Alabama, and as part of that, they run 10, 12,000 work orders a month, ranging from we need to replace the batteries in the remote we need to replace the light bulb in the ceiling to fix the leaking toilet or the fridge is making noise. Because these are owned units, meaning there's an owner and they're
Right.
providing a management service, when a technician goes out and does work, they are having to report back to the owner, hey, we had this issue, we resolved this issue, we believe that this issue has been satisfactorily resolved. Well, humans are fallible, and in the field, humans might
Mm.
record bad notes in the ticket. They might say something that they don't want to present to the owner. The pictures that field services individuals might take are not always representative of the work that was completed.
Mhm.
And so uh, their old process was we have to have a manager review very quickly the details, the summary of the work done, and the pictures on this ticket before we will send it to the owner, because we're concerned about presenting poor quality photos or description to these owners. So the first
Right.
step of that AI solution was we can have AI look at the pictures and confirm these pictures represent, as described in the ticket of the work that needed to be completed. These pictures
Mhm.
do an accurate job of representing that. And of course, it's like if the pictures of your feet and you were supposed to fix the refrigerator, it can identify that.
Mhm.
Likewise, they have a set of rules that say this is how we want to describe the work we completed. Things you know foul words, as an example, are not appropriate in the
Mhm.
ticket. We don't want to have that and present that to an owner. That's an obvious example, but they have a range of
Mhm.
standards that they look to adhere to. The human in the loop or in the lead experience, that new human AI interface that we initially created, is what we would call a sidecar. It's a little it's a web-based dashboard that sits on the side of the manager's computer, and
Mhm.
initially, it is just evaluating each one of those work orders against that set of criteria and saying, do we think this is good or do we think this is bad? The AI was making that choice, but there was no automation actually back to the owner yet. It was more a very rapid tool for the managers to say, I agree with your decision or I disagree with
Mhm.
your decision. I agree that this conclusion is right. That was then feeding back into the system to make it better. So step one in change management is ownership of outcome, right?
Right.
That the people who are using the tool feel like they have an ownership in the quality of the tool or the output of the tool. Give
Yep.
you a great example. Their standard requirements, if equipment is replaced in a unit, is one must take a picture of the serial number of the new equipment. That makes sense if you're replacing
Yeah.
a pump on a fridge. It doesn't make a lot of sense when it's batteries, right? So but the AI was being it was taking it literally, and it was saying, you replaced batteries, I do not see a picture of the serial number of these batteries. Fail. Okay, that's a great example where the feedback of the humans says, wait a minute,
Mhm.
we need to loosen these sorts of boundaries.
Mhm.
Once they got comfortable, the next step of that process was to automate the approvals. They said, okay, we agree with these approvals. The pictures are good, the description is good. Automate that approval. Now that goes back to the owner automatically. So now you're suddenly saving me time. The initial
Mhm.
step was you given me a new interface. Now the interface is just focused on where are the problems manifesting, where does work need to be, where does this ticket need to be updated. And so I
Right.
think that kind of evolution of a new place where I can just see the speed with which this is analyzing, that I can participate in a feedback loop to make it better and get confident that it's doing a good job. And then ultimately it's saving me time. That's a transition that our
Mm.
clients love going on, and they feel an ownership through that process.
Mm. I mean, that's a great story, and I know we talked about that story a little bit in the prep meeting. And one of the things you said about that that I thought was interesting, and I've seen this myself, that you can have some unintended consequences in a positive way in some of these implementations. But I know one of the things you said in this case was not only did they get the improved greatly the way these reports looked and went to the owners, but they also started to find certain items that hadn't been invoiced, or other ways in that to recover some lost revenue. And I mean, that unexpected ROI, I'm sure obviously that was a big benefit to them. But is that common? And how should companies think about those AI projects sort of in that context?
Yeah. So what was funny about that situation was we didn't really instruct the LLM flag when units that were showing up as being used in replacement were not actually showing up on the invoice. We just gave it all the information and said, this is
Right.
this is what you're doing. You're evaluating this ticket. And this comes back to, you can't write all the software that an AI will automatically do just through its nature as understanding
Yeah.
its job.
Yep.
And in that case, as you described, it started flagging, hey, you replaced the filter or these light bulbs or these batteries, and they're not showing up in the invoice to the customer. You're leaving money on the table. And that was because it was easy for the field techs to just grab stuff out of the supply closet, stick it in
Right.
there, and not, they're busy. They're busy. So that was a great unintended consequence. But I would use that as a there's a bigger pattern that we see, which is oftentimes our clients are going through a kind of a multi-stage AI evolution. It starts with an automation. That's an easy thing for people to understand. They know
Right.
that if humans are doing a high volume task that requires little intelligence, AI can potentially do that. Almost universally, though, you're getting now a data set into a system that either in that case, which was a little bit unexpected but beneficial, but certainly no matter what, you will have a new data set that you can apply some additional thoughts to. That
Mm.
same uh, 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 um, um, forklift management company that I described earlier,
Mhm.
their data set was every single repair and fix and maintenance task on every single forklift or pallet jack or pallet mover across hundreds and thousands of vendors. Oh, that's a lot of data to understand. Are we being overcharged? Are we getting hit for towels when the contract doesn't allow us to do that? So generally, we want to take clients on a journey of saying, get the data into a system. You don't know yet what the unexpected opportunities of using that data in a new and unique way might be. It could be, cost savings. It could be revenue opportunities. We see a lot of times the more data we get into a system, sales team members get a hold of that and say, gosh, if I could get a view of that data, I look like the smartest person in the room. And so you suddenly have a revenue driving opportunity as well.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that's a that's a great example to what we were talking about before about this hybrid workforce idea, right? I mean, the collaborative effort is producing things that are well beyond the original scope, because you do have the capability to look across a broader set of data and analyze it in much shorter periods of time and in context, and really learn from that. And then it's a back and forth between human and agent as they work through those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mm.
that can range from um, hey, we want to take a data set and do prediction, and we didn't really think about why some of the data might be moving. One of our clients is a physical security services organization. They literally staff unarmed and armed, guards at your 7-Eleven or your bank, or et cetera. And they were trying to look at what were some of the trends between 2024 and 2025 that kind of drove security services. And one of the big trends was there were a lot of hurricanes in 2024 that
Mhm.
required emergency security services because power was out and facilities were damaged, et cetera. And there were not a lot of hurricanes last year in 2025. Well, so now they're starting to think about, okay, how do we predict into 2026? Um, where I just saw there'll be six major Atlantic hurricanes is what they're forecasting this year. Who knows if they're right or not? But the point is now they are looking at things that go far beyond crime rates
Mhm.
and employment rate statistics, which are kind of obvious to humans, to some of these other things that might not have been obvious as major drivers of the business.
Mhm.
And I think that's exactly right. If you invite the AI to look across a span of data in unique ways, you can be surprised in some of that dynamic thinking.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I think that it is a good example of the power of the combined effort, and the human doing what they do, and the digital worker doing what they do, and bringing that together is really powerful.
For sure. Yep.
You talked about a little bit before, we were talking a little about human in the loop, and I have some very particular ideas around that too. I've thought about this a lot, and I think, you know, the in the proof of concept world, human in the loop, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because I don't really have the trust yet. I'm trying something. I want to see if it works. So that sort of thing. But when you start to scale systems up, having humans have to approve everything that a machine can do at scale, that this doesn't seem reasonable for most
Yeah.
processes, right?
Yeah.
Once we start talking about that progression to human in the lead, how, you know, what does that progression look like for the companies that you work with, and what has to change organizationally to adapt to those stages as it moves through them?
Yeah, I think it's very important early on to lay out with a customer who's going on this journey why what the role is that they're playing in the stage of the rollout of the system, right?
Mm,
There's a very big difference between early, kind of almost pre-production, checking the work of the system. Did we catch all of
mm,
the unexpected cases? And kind of strengthening the borders of the system. One of the first invoices that we processed in production for one of the clients was Canadian. It had Canadian tax implications. None of the test data set that we had received had Canadian invoices on it. And it's like, oh, okay, great. That was an edge case that we didn't expect. And so you might be starting with, we're seeking to strengthen the edge cases of this solution, because you can't know going in necessarily, especially a company that's processing a large volume of information, what
mm,
all those different edge cases are going to be. We work with a customs brokerage company that helps import products from across the globe. The quality of data, the use of data, the consistency of data across tens of thousands of importers can vary, right? And so you might
mm,
initially be around, let's strengthen the edges of this system. I think then you're moving to, how quickly can we get comfortable with fractional automation, as an example. These are the
mm,
use cases that we are simply going to automate. We're comfortable. We've seen enough data. We know that this is processing correctly. So then you're
mm,
moving into a fractional automation. And then, for us, there might be an argument that says you're never going to get to 100%. It's just not possible.
mm,
But if you can get to 90 or 95%, then the remainder exists because there's probably real decision making that has to go on there, and
mm,
it might be deeply nuanced. I think the point that we try to make in this conversation with a customer is, it is not an endless first period where you're helping tighten the edge cases. That's a 30, 60. There's a defined period during which
right.
that is happening.
Yeah.
And then you are saying, let's not chase edges at this point. Let's chase automation in large chunks. This group of data can go through. This group of data can go through. As an example, with the commercial or the real estate manager, the approvals can go through. They still want to touch the ones that get rejected, because, as an example, it might require somebody to go back out and take new pictures. That's not something in
Mhm.
AI. I mean, you could fabricate a picture, but that would be disingenuous in terms of the result. And so I think it is you are helping us refine the system. You are helping us determine where the system is eligible for automation now. And then ultimately, you are looking for us, you're playing a role to help us add more insight into the system in a way that makes it even more powerful or more intelligent than it had been. And I think that those stages work very well for mid-market companies, especially.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. And there is there's certainly processes that are never going to fit underneath that fully autonomous umbrella because of risk or, risk mitigation, that sort of thing. But a lot of the things that are processes you undertake there can move to that automated phase at some point and
Yeah.
provide additional benefit. Yeah.
We do. One of our clients is an architectural and engineering firm, and they have experts who go take pictures of, you know, the bowels of a building and the fire doors and
Mm.
the egress and how pipes go through walls. And the system does a really good job based on a significant amount of their historic proprietary data. Right? There's a ton
Right.
of their inspection results over X years, vectorized and pre-processed
Mm.
and made available to this system. So the system can spit out here's our from a bunch of pictures. Here's our analysis of building code violations, condominium association as built inconsistencies, et cetera, et cetera. You're still going to want somebody, I mean, an engineer with a certification who is putting their name on it is going to take a look at that information, but you might dramatically accelerate the extraction, the analysis, the organization of that data in a way that their job gets a lot easier. I think in those cases, we might eventually, transition to full automation. But, if somebody's got a liability that they are taking for signing off on this, there's still a step.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the big topics this year related to that we've been looking at is governance, and I've come to the conclusion that governance really does have to be built in from the front, or governance by design, as I've called it, not slapped on at the back like perhaps we've done with a lot of governance in the past. And I know you talked about hard constraints, soft constraints, gating, different parts of the control architecture that you need to put in place from a governance perspective for AI, to justify decisions before you put it in production. How do you approach that when you're deploying AI in a mid-market company that, may not have really had a governance team, or definitely not a dedicated AI governance team in the past?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we seek to unpack, where governance needs to layer in as part of
Mhm.
our conversation. So, one of course, very early is like data, right? We need to
Mhm.
the risk of using data in a certain way, the risk of touching data in a certain way, anything proprietary, confidential, and how that is being used is really important. We will tend we tend to do some non-trivial pre-work on data transformation. That might be in our system, or it might be in a client's existing system, in order to anonymize data where you don't need it. Right? It's easy to just pump anything into a system, but that's not necessarily what's needed for the system to be intelligent. We will often when we are writing to existing enterprise systems, Salesforce as an example, it's very common that our solutions are writing to new objects that are not the core object of the business itself, so that they can put an additional layer of checking in their core system before that enters a production workflow.
Mhm.
But I think it's the conversations that we tend to have are, first, we tend to use the hyperscalers as in our solutions, right? We believe there's a significant benefit to our customers in the fact that Claude's making an announcement every single day. It seems like these days with new capabilities that add value in these solutions. So we tend to use the hyperscalers. First, we have to get comfortable. What does that mean from an API standpoint for your data being provided into that solution? If we are going to do some either fine tuning to a model or in context learning to a model, what are we willing to give that solution versus what should be deterministic code after the fact? And I think all of that at that data layer is perhaps the most foundational element of our governance approach. And then the hard constraints, soft constraints are going to come in where like you can't touch this source data. You're not even close to this source data. Versus we're okay with you pulling that and wrapping it and maybe responding back and augmenting in a way. I think our general message to especially mid-market companies is you have all of this proprietary knowledge that has huge value, but you're not getting the benefit from it now. So let's not over-index on security there. We don't want to be, of course, we want to be secure, but we don't want to have a pattern which is we're so tight with our data that we're not going to be willing to get the benefit from it. I think that's actually a misstep for these companies right now.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like the idea that there are things when you're defining the process and how the agents are going to, work inside of this. It's almost like this three-dimensional, space at an airport. When an airplane comes in, you've got an air traffic controller that keeps them in the zone. But if they're in the zone, you just let them go, right? I mean, they don't need anything. But if they get near the edge, you need to bring them back. And then there also have to be places that just simply can't. That's a boundary, and you can't go beyond it. And if you make it so that it doesn't have access to that, or it can't approve this, it can't do this, then that's a simple way to put governance in place that you can trust because it's predetermined some of those issues for you.
Yeah, and our architectures are generally going to be very much separation of concerns architectures, right?
Mm.
Heavily API driven across those separation of concerns, so that this agent, as an example, with these AI tools can touch this read-only copy of our sandbox of our data, and that's all it can do to make an interpretation and pass that back to another system. I think architecture decisions early can give you a lot of confidence in enforcement. And then, of course, this can be an endless, turtles all the way down approach, but you can put, kind of evaluators into the equation as well. Before an action gets taken, I'm going to evaluate this against a security stance that we have or a data integrity stance that we have before I allow it, as an example. And again, for us, that would be that might be a complete separation of concerns. It's I want to make this decision. I'm going to pass it to an evaluator, and now the evaluator is going to say, yes, go execute this. The evaluator itself can't even execute it. The final step in the equation can. And those sorts of expert or orchestrator expert models and evaluator models, I think, are key to preventing an unexpected outcome. Certainly our systems are not. Hey, one agent can touch every one of your production systems, and it's a single fire prompt, and good luck. That's not how we architect.
Close your eyes and
exactly.
Yeah. I like that. I think one of the systems that I was looking at recently did something in governance that I really like, and I think that applies exactly to what you're saying. This idea of I called it an interceptor, but it's an agent that sits on top of a small model that's just for whatever that function might be, and you can build into that sort of singular mindset of here in our culture we talk to our customers and do this for our customers, but then we don't do these things, and what's in, what's out. But things like that are very difficult. You can't just say to an AI, agent, be nice to our customers because you're going to have some unintended consequences that you definitely didn't foresee nor want, right?
Everyone gets a refund.
Exactly. And you don't have to return a thing to us. We're happy
Yeah,
to give
exactly.
you money. Yeah. So I
Exactly.
mean that really makes sense to me. I think to have these constraints as you design the system versus, now I have a problem that happened at machine speed with 10,000 agents. I can try to
Yeah.
fix it, but the problem's already so big that, who knows? It's
Yeah. And I think as part of that, this uh we talk about, I joke about single shots, but people just try to cram a gazillion things into the prompts for somebody to evaluate a lot of different factors, and we're much more we like to tune that down, right? We think there is certainly a sweet spot of giving enough context so decision making can happen, but if you're doing an evaluation, right, these are our standards for what a photo must look like to demonstrate work in a home.
mm,
That's a very prescriptive step for us to break apart and just have that system be responsible for that.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. We were talking about one of your agents you called Digital Greg, which I like, by the way. I don't know why, but that's attractive. But anyway, the best commercial refrigerator estimator you'll ever find, you say. And it, challenges the capturing of decades of all this institutional knowledge in an agentic system. But there are things that you just like these are human expert gut feelings about things too. I mean, there are some things that make sense to go in the agent and some things that don't. I mean, what's the line between what you think AI can absorb versus what really does need that human touch when we're making decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think uh, the this is very much the inside out disruption that we talked about, right? The
Mhm.
Greg that has been doing commercial refrigeration estimation for 25 years has a tremendous amount of knowledge. Oh, you never use that coupling with that, pipe valve
Right.
size. It just, whatever. Oh, we never do half-inch pipe on ceilings because guess what? People grab onto it and hold onto it, and you would not expect
Mm,
somebody to put 190 pounds on it, but they'll do it, and therefore, that's a learned thing. And that's the sort of like nuance and depth that
mhm.
person learns over 25 years. I think
Yeah.
we're kind of on a little bit of the bleeding edge right now with these sorts of projects. And our strategy right now is deep, long interview, day in the life, sitting, looking at many different examples, of course pumping examples into AI and having it do its analysis, but a lot of interview based discovery. And you're seeing this more and more in the media, right? The technology
Mm,
is less the challenge than the domain knowledge, and so how you
mm,
capture domain knowledge is critical. What you're never going to know in a system like that is, oh, um, I actually happen to know that Susan, our engineer, it's little league season, and she really likes to get to her
mm,
boys' games on Tuesday and Thursday. And so I'm going to bake that into the estimate in terms of time because we're not going to be able to work overtime on those days. That's stuff where I don't see it right now, and I don't know that there's a mechanism for getting to that. And so I think you want to take the tedium out, this valve, this joint, this coupling. You want to get the rules, never use half-inch pipe when it's going to be on a ceiling, but
right.
you've got to allow for a human to say, I happen to know this team, and so and so has been sick for a couple weeks, and we're gonna account for that. Or
Mm,
even some things of we were looking at examples where we got to bring the crane in and lift the condenser off the roof, but there's this fixed thing here that's going to make the crane a little hard to position, and so we're going to actually take a little bit longer. That comes from experience, and I'm not
mm.
positive that we're at a place right now that AI can interpret that.
Mm. I mean, yeah, that to me that does seem like a logical line for now, and it's not a fixed line, right? It's a moving line because certainly as
For sure.
systems learn more,
Yeah.
your system will actually pick up some of those things over time, and context and
Correct.
memory, obviously the important piece there. But at the same time, that's a long process. That's not a you're going to go in and interview everybody and capture everything they know tomorrow kind of a thing. So,
And I think as part of that, the message to companies who might think, oh, well, we want to wait until it's possible to do all that. That's a mistake because, as you just
mm,
described, there are tools for learning. There are tools for managing memory and context that system has.
right.
Where the earlier you get people using them and providing that feedback and clarifying why a decision was made in this way, the better off you are for having that come along in the evolution of the system.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. It certainly embeds itself, and you collect that knowledge over time. It makes sense that you're growing that knowledge base. Um, Hey, for mid-market companies, a lot of times when they, as a growth strategy, they do acquisitions and roll-ups and that sort of thing, and obviously private equity involved in that too. But you end up with a whole bunch of systems. I know I was talking to a CIO recently about his CRM systems and how they could get a complete picture of the customer, and pretty much at the end of the conversation we decided that they couldn't because they had 33 different systems that were complete silos, right?
Yeah.
And it's a nightmare. But and historically, I mean, that would be a in some cases a project you couldn't even really complete, right? But how does AI change that? I mean, what does the bridge look like now that you can build this, you know, agentic layer that can help you with that problem?
Yeah. I mean, and you nailed it, right? Especially in PE backed businesses where PE is buying a platform and then adding on
Mm,
to it over time. You're going to run into system spread and system scope. In fact, I was just before this on a call, and new acquisition. We've got our CRM here. This company's on HubSpot. How are we gonna rationalize that? Are we doing a migration, or can we create a common layer? And I think we would argue that an agentic layer can normalize relatively well across disparate, formats
mm,
of data. That an agentic layer can normalize this client is the same as this client, even if the names are different. And then it really is, again, kind of breaking into a separation of concerns. Is hey, your first job is to at least figure out
mm,
what's the how do I know that this customer is this customer is this customer across these different platforms, and then what am I trying to get out of it? I'm trying to get a common view of growth or history or contact movement, whatever that might be. And so we're big believers in don't be shy about dumping a lot of different data and a lot of different data formats into an AI system.
mm.
You can test that stuff very fast to figure out if it can sort it out, and then it's a question of like, well, so what are you trying to get? Are you trying to get historic reporting? Fine, maybe then you have an agentic pipeline that's just doing your transformation to get it into a data set, into a
Right.
data lake or a data warehouse or a BI tool, and you can do your reporting. Or are you looking to do something else? A lot of times we would argue what you're really looking to do is take the data you have across these different systems, enrich it with other data that you might never have had a
Mhm.
chance to pull in, and make predictions or see around the corner a little bit more than
Mm.
historically you could.
Yeah. I mean, it is an argument for how much automation can help in areas that we aren't really maybe looking at when you think of bringing it into the business. You're thinking about those cool workflows that you can do, but underneath that, the automation around the data layer can have tremendous effect for the business. And even though it's kind of under the covers, that could be a real transformation for them in and of itself.
It reminds me of a client that I was working with years ago. This is a little bit before GPT was available. It was not AI addressable, and they're a field services, snow removal, landscaping for
Mhm.
commercial real estate company, and they receive work orders from a gazillion different systems that their clients use. Corrigo for work order management, or Service Channel for work order management. These third-party systems that your big, Lowe's keys in the request to have something done at their facility. And the challenge then was this massive regex attempt to figure out what are they asking to have done and how does that correlate to a team and a task
Mhm.
for the company. Because I said, hey, I want you to remove the shrubs. Okay, that's a landscaping request, that's this. Or hey, the branches are a problem. Okay, branches, that's so kind of the same thing. And you had all these different variation with no guarantee that you were going to get the information in a way that you could translate to a readily understood task. And as I think about the effort to do that 5 years ago, that effort would be solved in an instant
Mm.
today, because you would just simply say what we care about is snow removal or ice removal or landscaping or sweeping of parking lots.
Mm.
Tell us which this is, right? and
Yeah.
and and the LLM would have no trouble doing that interpretation. And so I think you're
Mm.
right, that data normalization is, put aside workflow automation, data normalization is a huge value that people can get immediately and right now.
Yeah, and just being able to tie all those layers together after all these years of, SaaS solutions and credit cards, it's
Right.
managing
Right.
all that is complicated. Well,
Exactly.
for an executive, a CEO in a mid market company, or private equity operating partner that might be listening, and there's a lot of pressure to act. Or the boards are pushing. I mean, I'm on a couple of boards. We're talking about it at every meeting. How do we get more of this into the business? So there's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure. But what advice would you have for for that executive about taking their first step without trying to boil the ocean and it's and scariness, I guess.
Yeah. I think I'm going to answer in a couple ways. So certainly, if within your organization you see multiple humans doing the same information task,
Mm.
that's an opportunity. Go tackle that. Right. If you see a super high volume task where speed to respond with intelligence is a differentiation for you,
Mm.
go tackle that. One of our conversations was with a company that does disaster recovery in homes. You had a flood or a fire or something like that. The faster they can respond with a quote, the more likely they are going to win that business. And so
Mm.
that would be kind of a high velocity task for us. Or a data insight. If you felt like if you had just a little more a different view of your data, maybe that data enriched with a little bit more information, you could
Mm.
make better targeting decisions or staffing decisions or resourcing decisions. Those would be like where I would try to start. It is very common that it's an automation, like I said, automating that high volume information task or that high velocity task with the data assembly to feed that. um, I would say if you have a bunch of employees who are like, I've spent 4 hours a week doing this and 8 hours a month doing that, those are tough. Those are going to be tough to build. There are simple workflow tools that you can use to try to tackle those, but your
Mm.
ROI is going to be a little less meaningful, and so you're not going to drive alpha if you're a portfolio of a PE firm necessarily for that. So I
Yeah.
think I think that don't be afraid to take your business and jam it into an LLM and say, you know, where should we start? These tools
Mm.
will give you a lot of good insight, and certainly we have tools that are our kind of what we think of as our key themes, and we do that all the time.
Mm.
I would choose a champion within the organization, somebody who is going to be the internal cheerleader for that solution, because
Mm.
especially if you try to roll something out to employees who are feeling a little threatened, who are feeling that this is not where I want to go,
Right.
they're going to find reasons to hate it and dislike it and undermine it. And so you got to have that internal champion to see exactly what's happening and turn that into a success.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so really interesting conversation and very actionable, which I think is probably the best benefit of any a podcast you could do is
Sure.
if you can learn something you can actually do something with that's serious value. But before I let you go, one thing I like to ask at the end, just for the benefit of the audience, could you recommend somebody, thought leader, an author, somebody you follow, somebody that you think the audience would enjoy and learn from?
Well, I was going to pull up your book, but I felt like that would seem a little too staged
That might have seemed a little staged. I appreciate
for
it,
the
but
audience. No, you and I talked about this. I have actually recently been rereading Walden by Thoreau. And the reason I have been doing that is I think now with our post social media, advent of AI, the lessons that you can take from that book are very different than when we all read it when we were, I don't know, 15 and in middle school, right? When you hadn't lived life. And certainly for us, it was pre a lot of these technology advancements. It is, there's a lot of fear that is happening in the industry right now. And I think if you read something written in the mid 1800s and see some of the fears and concerns he was expressing, but realize that we are almost 200 years later, and it's okay. The world has continued. We have evolved. Certainly there are challenges, but there are great benefits as well. I mean, he died of tuberculosis at like 49, so you could point to some advantages of technology. But I do think the piece in that book, it's okay, calm down, take a beat in our modern world, is helpful to me now at 51 years old that, maybe it wasn't when I was 15, as I said. So, and it's an easy read. You can break it up and have it over your coffee.
Yeah, no, that's great. A great book. I should reread that. It's been quite a while. Although I
There
will
you
say,
go.
when you first said it, the first thought that came into my mind is there is some argument for going to live somewhere on a remote lake by
Yeah,
yourself.
well, and of course, I am being a child of the current age. I actually have a long running GPT thread where I'm talking to it as if it's my book club about it, and the GPT is pretty aware that the current stress of social media and our global order can be stressful, and that we might all want to go to a lake. So it has that instinct.
I like it. I like it. Well, Andrew, thanks again. So really appreciate it. Really interesting conversation, and I know the audience got a lot of benefit from it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.